Hello, I'm Michael Hooper, and today I'll be talking to you about punctuation. Punctuation is an important part of written English, so it's important to know how to use it correctly. Punctuation is used differently in different English-speaking countries. There are also many style guides that recommend competing and sometimes contradictory rules for using punctuation. As a result, it is impossible for this video to provide a single set of rules that are accepted internationally. It is also impossible to present all of the specific differences between popular British and American usages of punctuation. So this video will focus on punctuation used in the US, while occasionally providing British examples to show how punctuation rules can differ. Today we will focus on 6 punctuation marks. These are full stops, question marks, apostrophes, quotation marks, semicolons, and colons. You may be wondering why commas are missing from this list. Commas have already been covered in an earlier lesson, so we won't study how to use them today. Before we talk about punctuation, we need to know something about spaces. English words must be separated by spaces. However, punctuation is slightly different. Let's look at 3 example sentences. There are no spaces before any of the punctuation marks in these examples, aside from one exception, the opening quotation mark. So, one rule we can follow is that only opening quotation marks require a space in front. The following example sentences show that there should be a space following most punctuation. However, there are more exceptions. Firstly, apostrophes and hyphens don't require any spaces at all. Then we have the complicated world of quotation marks. Quotation marks are handled differently in US and British English, and I'll discuss them in more detail later. For now we can say, opening quotation marks don't have spaces before the next word. Closing quotation marks don't have a space behind them if there is punctuation directly after them. Any punctuation directly before a closing quotation mark does not require a space after it. So to summarize, punctuation does not require a space in front, except for opening quotation marks. Apostrophes and hyphens don't require any spaces, and quotation marks have their own strange rules. Full stops are pretty simple. They are used to end sentences that are statements. For example, my name is Michael, or Nankai University was founded in 1919. Full stops are also used to create abbreviations. In American English, a full stop usually represents the part of the word that was removed. Here we can see 2 examples. However, in British English, abbreviations are often made without full stops. Different style guides recommend different rules. Next, we have question marks. Question marks are used to show questions, such as, what time does class begin? Is this your homework? And would you mind helping me with something? Question marks are used for questions in direct speech, but not indirect speech. By indirect speech, I mean when we describe what someone else said without quoting their exact words. Here is an example. Let's say that you see your friend talking to someone. You go to your friend and ask, what did that person want? Your friend can either quote the person's exact words by saying, she said, do you know where the bathroom is? Or your friend can report indirectly by saying, she asked if I knew where the bathroom is. Direct speech requires a question mark. Indirect speech does not. Apostrophes are used to show possession. In other words, who something belongs to, and to create contractions. The rules for apostrophe placement may seem complex, but they're actually quite simple. All non-plural words such as dog, teacher, or class take an apostrophe S. We can see this in the dog's ball and Mr. Smith's bag. Plurals, words that represent more than one of something that don't end with an S, also take apostrophe S. Men becomes men's, and children becomes children's. Plurals that end with an S, such as elephants or workers, only take an apostrophe. No extra S is needed. So students becomes students plus an apostrophe. It's quite straightforward. As I mentioned before, apostrophes are also used in contractions. Contractions are when bigger words are shortened into smaller words. For example, cannot becomes can't. The apostrophe represents the missing letters N and O. Don't is another contraction. In this case, do not has become don't. The apostrophe represents the missing letter O. Typically, contractions are considered informal. They shouldn't be used in formal writing. Although contractions are pretty simple, there is a special case. It's, with an apostrophe, is a contraction. If you want to say that something belongs to it, then you don't need an apostrophe. Let's look at the examples. It's morning in Beijing. This means it is morning in Beijing, a contraction. This is my dog. Its name is Toby. This means my dog's name is Toby, a possessive. Now we come to quotation marks. Quotation marks are mainly used for direct quotes and the titles of component creative works. A direct quote is when you use someone else's words. You can state what the person said in full, as in the first two examples, or you can continue your own sentence using someone else's words, as per the last two examples. The last two examples are still quotes because the words between the quotation marks come from some other original source. They are not the writer's own words. Quotation marks should be used for component works. This means creative works that are part of other larger works. This includes the names of songs within albums, articles in newspapers or journals, chapters in books, and episodes of TV series. Here we have two examples. Understanding Chemistry and Despacito are both component works. Therefore, we need to use quotation marks. Quotation marks are used quite differently in the US and the UK. Double quotation marks are favoured in the US, while single quotation marks are accepted in the UK. In the US, single quotation marks are used when a quotation contains another quote or the title of a component work. This can be seen in the first example. The British standard is the complete opposite, as can be seen in the second example. You may have noticed that the full stop is within the quotation marks in the first example, but outside of them in the second. This is another typical difference between US and British punctuation. Now that we know what quotation marks are used for, let's talk about how they fit with capital letters and punctuation. There are 3 rules to follow when it comes to capital letters. First, if you quote a full sentence, it should begin with a capital letter. Second, parts of quotes don't need to begin with a capital letter. And finally, split quotes only require a capital letter at the beginning of the first part. Sometimes, quotation marks come at the end of a sentence. If they do, should the punctuation at the end of the sentence go inside the closing quotation mark? According to many US style guides, the answer is simple. There are 3 basic rules. First, full stops and commas are always put inside closing quotation marks. Second, question and exclamation marks are included within quotes if they are part of the quote. If they are part of the larger sentence, then they are not included within the quotation marks. Finally, colons and semicolons at the end of sentences are not included within quotation marks. The first and third rules are simple, but the second rule may require explanation. In the first example, the question mark is included within the quotation marks, but in the second example it isn't. Why is that? Because the quote in the first example is a direct question. If you write the quoted sentence by itself, it would require a question mark. However, in the second example, the quoted text is a statement. Written by itself, it wouldn't require a question mark. The larger sentence is a direct question, so it requires a question mark. Therefore, the question mark is placed outside the closing quotation mark. In the UK, full stops and commas are treated the same way that question and exclamation marks are treated in the US. Alright, enough about quotation marks. Let's talk about semicolons. Semicolons have three main tasks. First, they can join two independent but related sentences. Second, they can help conjunctive adverbs such as therefore to join sentences. And finally, they can be used to make what I call superlists. Semicolons are a great way to join two complete sentences that are related to each other. In the two examples on the screen, a semicolon has joined two sentences that could have stood on their own. You could replace the semicolon with a full stop instead, but with a semicolon, the relationship between the joined sentences is emphasized. If your writing has too many short sentences, using semicolons is a great way to improve reader interest. Semicolons also help conjunctive adverbs to join sentences. Conjunctive adverbs can help to link ideas in separate clauses together. Some popular examples of these words are therefore, however, moreover, and as a result. So to join two sentences using semicolons and conjunctive adverbs, you should follow the pattern on the screen. Simply place a semicolon, a conjunctive adverb, and a comma between your two sentences. Finally, semicolons can be used to create superlists. When a list contains too many commas and clauses, it can be very confusing. To avoid this confusion, semicolons can be used to separate different items in a list. Have a look at the example on the screen. Without semicolons, this list is very confusing, as commas are used to separate items in the list and to show which universities are in which cities. Now take a look at this list. Each item on the list is clearly separated with a semicolon. The list is no longer confusing. It is clear which universities are in which cities. We have now come to the final punctuation mark of today's lesson, the colon. You may have noticed that my last sentence actually uses a colon. How convenient. Colons are useful for explaining or clarifying an earlier complete sentence. This is how I use the colon in the sentence on the screen. The words following the colon told us what the final punctuation mark of today's lesson is. Here are some more examples. In each case, the sentence following the colon explains or provides more information about the sentence in front of the colon. Notice also that in each case, the sentence following the colon does not begin with a capital letter, except for the first one, but that is because the letter I on its own is always capitalized. Colons can be used to introduce lists. However, you must make sure that the sentence introducing the list is a complete sentence. You can see some good and bad examples of colon use on the screen. The first and third examples are wrong because the sentences before the colons are not full sentences. Today, we learned how to use 6 punctuation marks: full stops, question marks, apostrophes, quotation marks, semicolons, and colons. In this video, I have provided some basic rules in line with common US English standards. That's all we have time for today. I look forward to seeing you next time.